Libai, Endless Longing 2. After sunset, flowers are wreathed in mist. A pale moon appears. Heartache puts an end to sleep. A Zhao thither, silent now, rests in its phoenix case. A shu lute begins to sound its mandarin duck strings. There's meaning in the melody no words can impart. If only spring winds could carry it to Janran Mountain. Separated by the blue sky, you haunt my memory. Eyes that once looked down so shyly now brim with tears. If by any chance you doubt the sorrow in my heart, come back and see this image in my mirror. So we have the second of Libai's poems on the old ballad theme of endless longing. And this second poem is pretty similar to the first one. If you remember, we talked about the first one yesterday, and that was presumably in the voice of a male persona, lamenting his separation, his distance from his beloved woman. This poem, this one, today's has been traditionally interpreted as the other way round, as a woman lamenting the separation of her beloved. As I mentioned in the other poem, Chinese poetry and the Chinese language are notoriously elusive at the time of specifying a subject of a poem, of using pronouns indicating person or number or genre for that matter. But probably a female speaker, a female persona can be guessed in this poem by some references in the last couplets to shy eyes looking down and a woman looking, well, a person looking in the mirror, which shows this person's sorrow. So the more domestic and coy, shy attitudes of the speaker seem to be pointing towards a female persona. Subject, so what is the subject? What is the topic of the short poem? The same as the previous one. So it's the pains of love, more specifically separation between lovers and the suffering that the lovers experience, one of them, but probably both, but the focus is on one of them, when lovers are apart. Minor sub-elements, wakefulness at night. In this poem, as in the previous one, the poetic persona is that of a sleepless person, unable to sleep. Music is probably more emphasized in this poem than seasonality. The previous poem had some vague references to autumn. This one has some interesting references to music, to musical instruments, which presumably the woman would be playing at night to attempt to express her emotions and take out the burden of her emotions, as well as perhaps pass the wakeless night, pass the time in that night without sleep. And okay, let's go on to the poem, and then we will comment a couple of other things that appear in it. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It hardly requires a paraphrase, really, because it's pretty transparent, except for a couple of images. So the first couplet: after sunset, flowers are wreathed in mist. A pale moon appears. Heartache puts an end to sleep. So we have a couple, it's clearly at sunset, so the night is coming in, and we have a couple of nature images that are beautiful, but I imagine they are supposed to be poignant and sad as well. Flowers are wreathed and therefore covered in mist and therefore invisible, and a pale moon appears. So they're beautiful sights, night sights perhaps, but they're also sad, and in resonance to the sadness of nature, the heartache, that is the pains of love, put an end to sleep of the poetic persona. Second stanza: a Zhao thither, silent now, rests in its phoenix case. A shu lute begins to sound its mandarin duck strings. There's meaning in the melody no words can impart. If only spring winds could carry it to Janran Mountain. So we have two musical instruments which are at the reach of the poetic persona. And one of them, one is translated as thither, the other as lute. From what I've checked in an original version of the poem, the first one is the ze, and the second one is the chin. The chin is the more common lute. It continued to be an instrument played by the scholars until the end of traditional China. The se, on the contrary, quickly became the old-fashioned, but it's pretty similar to the chin, maybe a little bit bigger. So one of those instruments, the zhao thither, is in its phoenix case. It is not being played. The other is being played presumably by the lady. I imagine that these two instruments might, in a way, be representing the two lovers. So the woman is playing the shu lute, and the zhao thither, that is the man, is silent now and away because he's absent. The regional locations of these instruments might indicate the physical separation. So the thither is called a zhao thither. I imagine Zhao might have been an area in China that produced good thithers, but Zhao was in the center north of China. Shu was in the extreme west. So perhaps the reference to these geographically located instruments, one played by the woman, the other in its case, is meant to evoke the distance separating the lovers. And also the importance of music. Music is very expressive for the Chinese. In Chinese literary theories, art is basically expressive of feelings, although what these feelings might be is a subject of contention in different literary theories. The classical Confucian theory emphasized that poetry expresses what's in the mind with intention, but what's in the mind with intention mainly meant political criticism or praise, which was one of the main functions of poetry in the Warring States period, and it would remain one of the main functions of poetry for the scholar officials during the imperial period as a way of subtly and indirectly criticizing imperial policies. But that poetry expresses what's in the mind intently could also be used as a sanction or as a description of poetry as the expression of emotion. And in fact, another of the texts that talks about that mentions how feeling, how the human being sees things, those things provoke an emotion. If that emotion cannot be expressed, cannot be compensated in the normal way, it generates sighs. If sighs are insufficient, one starts dancing. If dance is insufficient, one creates music and poems. Music is expressive of feeling, and in previous poems that we've encountered, we've seen how music is able to move the listeners and to create emotions, specific emotions in the listeners. So there's a meaning in the melody that the woman is playing no words can impart. If she were to try to express the sadness of separation in words, she would be less successful than she is by just playing a very, very sad melody on her lute. And it says, if only spring winds could carry it, this melody, to Jianran Mountain. So we get that the season is spring. Autumn is the typical season of sadness in Chinese poetry, but spring appears a lot in poems of separation as an antithetical contrast. Like spring is the time of love, of renewal, of greenness, of universal mating. So it's doubly poignant when a loved couple has to be separated in spring. There's a dissonance between the cosmic love of the season and the separation of lovers from social or political reasons. And it says, if only this winds carried the melody to Jianran Mountain. Jianran Mountain is in what today is Mongolia, so it would have been in deeply held barbarian territory. So this line seems to imply that the beloved is fighting wars in the north. Next stanza. Separated by the blue sky, you haunt my memory. Eyes that once looked down so shyly, now brim with tears. If by any chance you doubt the sorrow in my heart, come back and see this image in the mirror. In the previous poem, we also had some haunting. The poetic persona lamented that he couldn't get to the beloved in dreams. In this one, we seem to be getting a similar contrast of haunting and bewitchment. They are separated, but the absent lover haunts, if not the dreams, at least the mind and the thoughts, the memory of the poetic persona. And her eyes, that once looked down so shyly, as was becoming in a woman, for our traditional Confucian culture, they're now full of tears. So now they're not full of shyness, they're full of tears at being far from you. And the poem ends up with a rhetorical question. It says, you might think I'm just speaking and my words are not deeply felt, but if you could just see my image in the mirror, my sleepless, sad, ruined face, devastated, my beauty diminished because of all these tears and all these suffering and all these wakeless nights pining for you. If you, my lover, could see this, you would know that my sadness is not pretend, that my sadness is true. So that's about it. Quite a short poem and quite nice poem, even though if I might feel it's a bit conventional, a bit trite in its topic, and it doesn't feel like anything specifically intimate or genuine about Li Bai himself is being transmitted in the poem. It feels a bit like just an aesthetic exercise at painting love longing, but it's okay.